I would like to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon. Bob Riddell is president and founding advisor of Riddell Risk Management, an advisory practice supporting the development of strategic enterprise security, life safety, risk management, and governance programs. He is also a co-owner and chief strategy officer of Concilium Public Sector Services Incorporated. Bob brings more than 3 decades of corporate security and life safety experience. He has served as national director, security and life safety in the property management sector for Cadillac Fairview and Ivanhoe, Cambridge. He has held several corporate security management roles in the financial sector with HSBC Bank of Canada, the Canadian Bankers Association, and the Royal Bank of Canada. From 2012 to 2022, Bob facilitated the Security Risk Management Advisory Council within BOMA Toronto. He is board chair of the Overseas Security Advisory Council Canada Toronto chapter and is a member of both the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Bob is an ASIS International Board Certified CPP and the Canadian representative in their Commercial Real Estate Community Steering Committee. He also holds the Associate Institute of Canadian Bankers designation. If you have any questions for Bob, we'll save about 5 minutes following his presentation. So go ahead and record those at any time, and we'll save those for when Bob wraps up. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
Neil, thanks very much. I guess if you hang around long enough, you gather a lot of pages on your resume. So I appreciate that. And I also really appreciate the honor of speaking today at today's Canadian Security Honors event. I also want to start by really extending my sincere congratulations, not only the winners of this year's award or awards, but to all the deserving candidates. And I'm sure their efforts made it difficult for the judges to make some choices. I never fail to be amazed by the many private sector security and life safety practitioners, the law enforcement officers, and related service members that I've met, and they devote so much time to developing their skills and professionalism, acquiring knowledge that they openly share, and to take the time to listen attentively and communicate clearly. Most of all, I'm impressed by the dedication and contributions to the safety and security of the communities that they serve. We're really lucky to have all these professional colleagues bring so much advice and innovative thought to their disciplines. And all of their efforts, alongside all of yours, combine to make our cities, provinces, and all of Canada safer and more secure every day. Let me begin just by saying that my comments are probably a little subjective. They're probably going to need a little bit of added research, but they're really informed by a lot of conversations I've had with people in the private security sector, law enforcement, and other stakeholders. I really do look forward to your future comments or suggestions on this. But let me just state to begin that right now, we continue to navigate the remaining uncharted waters of post-pandemic society. We've all witnessed the results of terrible illness, the growth of fear, suspicion of authority, and all manner of social frustration, despair, violent protests, alongside the continuing temptations of criminality. We're beginning to see, or we're in the middle of seeing, the tug of war between reluctant employees and their employers who are seeking full-time return to their workplaces. A significant percentage of employees have already decided to become former employees by leaving their employers in the so-called big quit. Others have decided to engage in the quiet quit movement, meaning they not only intend on meeting the strict minimums required by their jobs. Sadly, they're not going to put any extra effort into their daily routines. There's some preliminary bits of information coming back to me saying that quiet quitting may very well lead to an insider threat increase on the part of unhappy employees who are willing to damage or sabotage their employer companies. That's certainly an issue worthy of all of our attention, and we really need to consider how to prevent that. We also witness political upheaval, growing silos, threats of ideological or state-sponsored terrorism remain. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to continuing global tension, unprecedented since the Second World War. There's financial calamity, and that's all been added to already a rocky global post-pandemic economy. Significantly here in our own country, we already have witnessed serious past injustices against our own diverse communities. The pandemic exacted a very heavy toll upon the members of law enforcement, emergency services, and healthcare services. And yet these folks persisted in their work, often to points of exhaustion. And many still served their communities, but for others, it understandably proved too much. It also directly or indirectly impacted all of you in the private security sector, not only on the corporate front lines, but alongside our public service colleagues in support of all of our communities. Despite all the many hopeful signs of improvement, we know that the negative factors can bring frustration, desperation, and even anger to our respective communities. And we all recognize that this might very well spill over into our scope of work and responsibilities. My view is that as these circumstances persist, we should continually and increasingly evolve into strategic planning and deeper ties between the public and private security sectors. Honestly, that's what brought me to look at and draw upon the founding police principles from the forward-thinking times of Sir Robert Peel about 200 years ago. But before going on, can I just add that despite what some of my close security and life safety friends and colleagues will tell you, it is not true that I knew Sir Robert Peel personally. Although I'm a bit older than today's top 10 under 40 award winners, please know my observations are recent and intended to generate some useful thought in developing security and life safety strategies, as opposed to any evidence of an evolving dementia on my part. At least I hope so. Some of you already know me, but for those of you who don't, allow me to quickly share a bit of my background. I started off as a banker in Main administration banking in Montreal. That led to regional and head office positions, allowed me to travel extensively across Canada, and I got to know the people and cultures across it. By 1988, I had moved to Toronto and I was promoted to my first security position as manager of security within the internal audit department of Lloyds Bank Canada. That began my vocation to security and life safety. Lloyds Bank was bought by HSBC, Bank of Canada, in 1990, and I continued in that role of overseeing security investigations for all branches in Eastern Canada. I was recruited in 1999 to join the Canadian Bankers Association as the advisor to the Director of Security. And I was recruited one more time in late 2000 to join the Royal Bank of Canada as manager of security strategy. By early 2006, I made a switch over to property, security, and life safety by filling one of three brand new security director positions inside the Cadillac Fairview Corporation Limited. I oversaw the security of retail portfolio that included the Toronto Eaton Centre and three other large malls. By 2010, I was lucky enough to work alongside Terry Chwanek and Luciano Cigroni within Cadillac Fairview's restructured National Security Operations Department under Terry's leadership. But 2014 brought a once-in-a-lifetime career opportunity for me, and I ended up joining Montreal-based Ivanhoe Cambridge as its National Director of Security and Life Safety. Making that change was a real tough decision, as I really enjoyed the camaraderie of the team at Cadillac Fairview. But I wanted the challenge to lead the renewal of a national security and life safety program. It was a great experience. And most of all, I had the privilege of building a top-tier national security and life safety team alongside three terrific managers, namely James Blight in Vancouver, Christopher Morgan in Montreal, and Alma Lekic in Toronto. However, 2020 brought the COVID pandemic. Strategic organizational changes were accelerated, and by June, many executive, mid-level, and support positions were structured out of the company, including mine. But that change led to me moving into an entrepreneurial role, and I formed Riddle Risk Management Incorporated, which is an advisory practice for strategic security and life safety risk management. But it also blossomed into an unexpected opportunity to work alongside former Toronto Police Service Deputy Chief Kim Derry. And he introduced me to his strategic plan for Consilium Public Sector Services Incorporated. As a result of that, in 2021, I became a co-owner of Consilium alongside Kim and 3 other former Toronto Police Service members, Superintendent Peter Lennox, Inspector James Brown, and the former Director of Finance and Administration, Angelo Cristofaro. They are all terrific, knowledgeable partners, and now great friends. I am very fortunate in being able to collaborate alongside with them. Consilium is currently affiliated with more than 30 independent subject matter professionals, academics, thought leaders, and corporate affiliates. All of them have leading expertise and many with direct experience with public emergency services and municipal government administration. And they provided me with many new insights, while I've been pleased to share my own private sector experience, thoughts, and observations with them. Consilium already provides valuable strategic advice to senior police executives, police service boards, municipalities, and related associations. And it's our intention to expand our scope of advisory services to the private sector, their associations, and by building public-private partnerships. These affiliations have enabled me to better understand the basic principles of policing, better understand the potential of the intersections of those principles with our own private security sector. I now also believe that a strategic approach to security and life safety risk management demands blending of viewpoints between both of those sectors. So let's move on to Sir Robert Peel. Aside from twice being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he's known as the father of British policing, owing to his founding of the Metropolitan Police Service, otherwise known as the Met, or Scotland Yard. Today, the Met continues in its responsibilities for law enforcement and crime prevention in London, England, except the financial core of the City of London. I've also learned that back in Peel's time, the principles might very well have been advanced by the first 2 commissioners of the Met and not Sir Robert himself. Although there are 9 principles, they're based pretty much on 3 concepts. First, way better to prevent crime from happening as opposed to having to chase after bad people, catching them, and then punishing them after the fact. Second, it's essential to enlist the support of the public in joining together as a community to help the police prevent crime. And third, very important, the police must work hard at earning the trust and support of their community. They must know their community, understand its roots, and continually prove that they are worthwhile the community's trust by always and impartially enforcing the law, while only choosing to use force as a last resort. So let's look at the principles, and rather reading them word by word, I'm going to paraphrase them a bit in respect to their key points. I blend principles 1 and 9 together. They highlight the key themes that the police will displace the military in the role of keeping community peace and law enforcement. Their primary directive is to prevent crime and disorder, and police effectiveness should best be judged by whether crime and disorder is minimized while the police keep a low profile. Now, that was revolutionary at the time, and pulled away from the harsh methods and intimidating presence of the military to enforce the laws. It really shifted also an emphasis from crime and punishment to crime prevention. These themes are very applicable to our private sector. The more we can contribute to peacefully preventing or mitigating crime and disorder, the better we become at supporting our communities, and by extension, the efforts of the police. I also suggest that prevention should include all reasonable behind-the-scenes efforts to appropriately gather and share information between the sectors. This can increasingly support the assessment of future threats of crime and disorder. Linking private and public sectors in such a process leads to increased analytical capacity, which would enable a faster turnaround for joint planning and strategies that prevent community harm. The establishment of a properly funded public-private fusion analysis center for open source information alone would enhance predictive assessments by an order of magnitude. let's look at principles 2, 3, and 4. And they emphasize the importance of the police to deeply understand the respective diverse communities and to foster the community's trust and confidence in them. To continually treat the community with respect and fairness in all their actions to enforce the law, and to consistently support the community in their better understanding of the laws, hopefully influencing the public to follow the laws. And above all, to make every effort to minimize the use of force. In my recent engagements with Consilium, I've witnessed firsthand the kinds of increasingly complex issues faced by today's police services within their communities. Many incidents are driven by social factors that bring despair to persons affected by homelessness, mental health, drug addiction, racism, or economic loss, sometimes leading people to make poor or desperate decisions. These societal conditions result in police interventions in the middle of the night because there is little or no other process in place to respond to those calls. Those calls for service are deserving of added community resources beyond police response, as many frontline officers do not have either the appropriate skills or training to deal effectively with these circumstances. Yet we all know any potentially violent situation must always integrate a police response to safeguard the public and persons involved. So let me point out that there are extraordinary parallels between frontline police officers and frontline private security guard personnel, as both of those groups frequently face similar conditions and challenges. Many other pressures affect law enforcement, including budgetary restraint, shifting provincial standards, police staff wellness issues, including the lingering impacts of pandemic and overtime fatigue. Adjacent to these are the elevated expectations of the public in respect to efficient delivery of their police services. And as if those factors aren't enough, both mainstream and social media coverage of incidents at the hands of police that result in any injury constantly serves to place law enforcement in a poor light that erodes the community's trust in its police, regardless of the actual professionalism of the frontline officers. Conversely, any failures by a police service to respect the public or to integrate a systemic process of de-escalation will increasingly lead a community to becoming more aggressive towards authority. The more police use physical force against the public, obviously, the less likely the police will be inclined to cooperate with the authorities. And we've already seen that tip the scales to create riots and violence. But I believe it's essential that any community continue asking tough questions, demand transparency, and expect police accountability where it is deserved. For all those reasons, it's essential for police leadership to ensure the fair and competent investigation of the offenses they encountered. They must equally establish appropriate transparency in their communications, as well as the disclosure of facts related to any crisis or incident. Of course, that's got to stay within the limits of the law. All of this, again, parallels and intersects with the private security sector. The principles of respect, earning trust, compliance with legislation, and treating people fairly all represent imperatives worthy of adoption by any of our organizations. While any serious deviation from these will likely lead to legal claims, damage to corporate reputation, or even potential criminal prosecution. Now let me go on to grouping principles 5 and 8. The police must also be impartial in how they apply the law. They must treat the public equally and in a positive manner, and they must avoid any perceptions of favoritism or conflict. The police must also remain well within their mandates and never imply or give the perception they have any judicial powers. The police are responsible to enforce the law in a manner that's fair, but ultimately they are not the lawmakers, and they too are subject to the law, just like us. The police must always be especially mindful of avoiding any appearance that they treat some members of the public with more favor than others. This all holds true for the private security sector. We must always be respectful of and remain consistently impartial in dealing with persons that we investigate or physically encounter. We must also avoid bias, prejudice, or conflicts within our work, and never ever misrepresent our power or authority. We must also understand and respect the constraints demanded of our police colleagues and not try to sway them to go beyond their mandates. I'm sure many of you have heard this next principle, number 6, and it's probably been described to you in many ways and in many terms. Pardon me. The police will only use physical force to the extent necessary to secure observance of the law or to restore order, and only when the exercise of persuasion, advice, and warning is found to be insufficient. That is pretty self-explanatory, and it prescribes that using force is a last resort. And I personally consider that essential to all private security. We've seen way too many headlines and media coverage, both here in Canada and the United States, showing tragic outcomes from the inappropriate use of deadly force by law enforcement. This has led to all manner of investigations, inquiries, demonstrations, protests, and even wide-scale rioting. However, we've had our YouTube videos as well. We know many people who agree with that principle, but unfortunately, there's still some people who disagree with it, both within the private sector and among law enforcement. Let me share one experience with you that I personally investigated. It happened some time ago in respect to a confrontation that took place near closing time in a large mall located in a Canadian city somewhere. It involved 2 alleged shop theft suspects, retail store loss prevention agents, and some property security guards. As you can guess, I can't share all the details, but following our review, it was apparent to us that the loss prevention agents had misrepresented an alleged theft. They engaged property security guards with incorrect information. The agents did not structure their intended arrest properly. And they even tried to redirect the arrest of the property security guards. Fortunately, unsuccessfully. Most importantly, the situation was allowed to get out of hand. It resulted in one suspect running away into the mall, into the main part of the mall, because guards were blocking the path to an exit. And this cascaded with a loss prevention agent taking chase, and inappropriately, one of the property guards started running after him as well. Within a minute or so, that suspect had run into the center of the property, and just as the agent was about to tackle him, the fugitive pulled out a gun, fired off a single round without aiming, and miraculously, somehow, no one was hit. Although the property security guard involved in the chase reported that he did hear the supersonic crack of the bullet as it passed very close to his ear. That same bullet, by the way, traveled some 80 feet behind the suspect, down a main corridor, struck a stainless steel garden planter box, ricocheted at an angle for about another 70 feet, right down the corridor of the property's food court, before finally striking a wall. Miraculously, again, no one was harmed. And the story was not picked up by the news media, and we were all more than lucky. By the way, the theft involved an almost empty cologne tester spray bottle of $0 value, and its removal from the store would never have led to any charge or any prosecution. The connection between this incident and the use of the force principle is this. It led to an extensive internal investigation of the interactions between security personnel and the public within properties. That generated many lessons for us, all of which resulted in a major cultural shift in security. We investigated the incident from a strategic perspective. We looked at all aspects, reports, and compared it to other information, and received advice from multidisciplinary professionals, including the police. Our aim was to improve the safety of all, and it ended up with a revision, articulation, and reinforcement of a new national arrest, use of force, and confinement policy. It also led to a governance mechanism. We ended up with dedicated regular reporting of and assessment of every arrest, use of force, and confinement, and time was allocated for regular assessments and analysis of all the information we had. That review revealed the need to revise security personnel training, and it was directly informed by the participation of the police in that jurisdiction. And we used other police services and private security stakeholders as comparatives. There are a number of lessons, clearly defining legal differences between the authority of public peace officers and our own, placing emphasis on the limits of civilian authority under the criminal code, need to reinforce training. We learned the police had similar struggles with frontline personnel. We even discovered that some local frontline police officers have been promoting the inappropriate participation of property security guards in police arrests. That led to the police going back and retooling some of their training and discussions with their frontline folks. We also had to make it clear to our retail and office tenants that there are divisions of authority between the police, private security, loss prevention, etc. And we clarified that property guards were on site to support keeping the peace on our premises as opposed to intervening in their making arrests of shoplifters on behalf of retailers. Finally, moving on to Principle 7, this instructs that the police must always maintain a positive relationship with the public, and the police must also always remember the police are the public and the public are the police. This forward-thinking principle urges police to form collaborative relationships with the community they serve, together with us to form one common community. And we should always collaboratively work together to make it as safe and secure as reasonably possible. Much of this is made worse by the discouragement with the public animosity directed against police. Despite being rooted with the discreditable conduct of a small percentage of peace officers, events outside of their own jurisdiction or even Canada affect our colleagues. And all of that has negatively affected the recruitment of future police officers, as fewer people are interested in pursuing a police career. And I'm sure you're going to agree that that also affects the recruitment of potential private security guard candidates as well. Strategic planning, therefore, becomes very, very important to policing. You may not be aware of this, but in Ontario, the Community Safety and Policing Act 2019 is already in place and waiting proclamation by the Lieutenant Governor. Section 39 of that act states that the Police Service Board shall, in accordance with the regulations, if any, prepare and adopt a strategic plan for the provision of policing. That single sentence means that Ontario's police service boards, and by extension, the police services they supervise, must have a strategic plan. That legislation outlines a long list of imperatives that all boards must consider. The intention is to ensure adequate and effective policing in accordance with the needs of their community, and to make sure that the public is satisfied with their police services. And it demands consultations together with the community, including businesses in the board's areas of policing responsibility. And that's an opportunity for us all. The outcome must be for all the police service boards to provide a strategic plan that the boards must review at least every 4 years, and they'll have to publish it on the internet. I think we should all keep an eye on that legislation, think about it in advance, and consider what kind of issues that require advocacy from among our community, and figure out the best ways of participating in those future public-private committees. Let me add that, as I mentioned earlier, given all these factors affecting police, several police services are already engaging third-party consultants to conduct independent service delivery reviews. And we've been fortunate enough in consulting to have participated in their taking a look and working alongside with them to take a look at many of the factors that have to be considered in terms of the routines and procedures, technology, and communications, so that they can start thinking about what they have to do to catch up in advance of that strategy edict and to support them in executing a strategic plan. Allow me just to add, I believe police are not alone in contributing to the safety and security of our communities. Corporate engagement, private sector, security professionals very much represents parallel investment, community safety alongside their own organizational duty of care. Let me just close as I see time is running on. You might disagree, but it seems to me there's still a lot of organizations satisfying with only doing security as opposed to strategically planning their security programs. We also know that there's some people who feel we've always done things this way and it works well enough. I think that it's worthwhile to move on to strategic positioning so that everybody goes forward with a strategic security and life safety risk management governance planning program. I promise you I'm not getting choked up. I think that any practitioner involved in private security business sector, whether frontline security guard or chief security officer of a major corporation, should continually emphasize the strategic assessment process of security and life safety, including thinking about environmental scans, assessing internal information, data, and looking to future medium or long-term horizons. I guess the best advice I can advise you of today is that we should all look closely at the discipline of enterprise security and life safety. That's the SRF. I'm a firm believer in that process, and I'll immediately confess that the cornerstone to my own conversion to it was reading one book, and that's namely Enterprise Security Risk Management, Concepts and Applications, written by Brian Allen, Rachel Lawyer, with Kristen Noakes-Fry as an editor. In my opinion, the reading of that book, alongside the study of other sources on the practice of ESRM, should be essential for every security and life safety practitioner and law enforcement, regardless of their stage or career. I'm going to stop it right there. Thank you so much for your patience and listening. I hope you found a few observations useful. And thank you again so much for your gift of your time.
Thank you very much for all your comments today, Bob. We appreciate your thoughts and your wisdom on the subject. Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of food for thought. So thank you for taking part of your day and sharing your thoughts with us and our audience today.